Hello and welcome back to the Training Tom podcast, the place where I share the lessons I have learned, the challenges I'm currently facing, and the questions I have for my future self. And today's episode is part 2 of the Mental Health and Me series. And this episode is lessons I have learned from therapy. Before we get started with this episode, I have a quick message to share. The Mental Health and Me series is a series where I share my own experiences and challenges with mental health in the hope that I can raise awareness. I also hope it helps support people who may be experiencing mental health challenges to feel less alone. Also, I am not a therapist, so I'm speaking only from my experiences and what I have learned through that process. Second, if you are struggling or someone you know is struggling with their mental health and you have immediate concerns about your own well-being or the well-being of somebody else, then you should call the emergency services or attend your local hospital. Alternatively, if you or someone you know could use some support for their mental health, I have provided some links to places where you can find support in the description. These links include charity helplines that you can contact any day at any time, and charities that provide online resources to help people understand their mental health better. Finally, seeking help is the first step to managing your mental health better. Thank you, and on with the episode. Similar to the last episode, I just want to start this episode by reminding everyone that these are my experiences, and I will be sharing what I have taken away from therapy, but also to start off with more globally, the reasons why I've had therapy in the first place. And I think that's a really good place to start. So I've had therapy and counselling, or versions of, 5 times over the past 6 years. And I've had counselling twice, and I've had cognitive behavioural therapy 3 times. All of those different instances of counselling and therapy have been with a different therapist as well. And I don't mind that. Some people might like to speak to the same therapist every time they go to therapy, but I quite like speaking to different people each time. And I'm going to start off by sharing the reason for that. So I often, and I don't know if anybody else feels the same way, but I often feel more comfortable speaking to people like therapists who have no preconceptions of who I am about how I'm feeling. And this might be challenging for people that are close to me to hear, but I find it very difficult to open up to people that are close to me. And it is something that I'm learning to get better at, because I don't think in the long term that's a very sustainable way of doing things, especially when I start asking myself questions like, what kind of husband do I want to be? What kind of partner do I want to be? What kind of father do I want to be? I think I have to get comfortable at some point, or at least get more comfortable being vulnerable and sharing my emotions and my thoughts with the people that are closest to me. But at this moment in time, and for the past, I'd say 10 years, I found it a lot easier to speak to people that don't know me about the way that I'm feeling. And that's one of the reasons globally why I find therapy quite useful, is because, and why I've had different therapists or different counsellors every single time, is because I find it easier to talk to somebody who has no preconceptions of who I am, doesn't know my history, and doesn't have any expectations of who they think I should be. Or at least in my mind, doesn't have any expectations of who they think I should be. And I feel like I can start with a clean slate and just be very open and honest with that person, because they don't know me. So they don't, like I've said, don't have any expectations of who they think I should be. So that's one of the reasons why I have had therapy, and also why I quite enjoy therapy at times as well. Another reason why I've had therapy is because Well, first of all, in those early days when I've had therapy the first couple of times, it's because I've not needed it, but I've wanted it. And I've felt like my mental health is in a poor place and it's in a challenging place. So it's being used, like I said at the end of the last episode, in a reactive way. And if you want to hear me explain a bit more about that, then I'd encourage you to go back to the episode part 1 of Mental Health and Me. But yes, I used it in a very reactive way, where I was in a very challenging place with my mental health, and I felt like I, perhaps actually needed to, rather than wanted to, needed to talk to somebody. Whereas the past 2 to 3 times, I've wanted therapy, and it's been a choice of mine where I haven't needed to have it because I've actually felt like my mental health has been in a good place at that time, but I've wanted to have it because I've realised that there is something that perhaps I need to unpack, or perhaps something I need to understand in more detail, and something that I wanted to prevent from becoming an issue later on in my life. Basically, I wanted to understand my mind and the way that my mind works better in the past 3 instances. And one of those was as recent as the summer of 2024. And this brings me on to an analogy that I've used with myself, but also used with friends and in my workplace too. And it's the analogy of your car or your boiler, basically a possession that needs servicing. So we often look at those possessions that we have, a car, a boiler, as being essential for us to live our life. If our boiler isn't working, we don't have hot water, therefore you won't be able to shower yourself and maintain your hygiene. And especially in the winter months, aren't able to live in a comfortable and, quite frankly, healthy environment. Likewise with your car. If your car doesn't work, you might not be able to get to work, you therefore might not be able to pay your bills. So we prioritise those things, and we make sure that they are in good working order, and we often get services and MOTs for those possessions to make sure that they don't have any issues in the future as well. We are proactive with our possessions, like a boiler and like a car, to ensure they continue running smoothly and that we can rely on them. Now I want to bring that into our health. And the question that I want to ask you, and it's a question that I ask myself often actually, is do I do the same thing, or do you do the same thing with your health? Is your health a priority to you? Because the way that I look at therapy or the way that I look at it now, and it's not always been the case, because when I first started getting therapy, I looked at it as, like I say, a reactive thing, but also as a cure for my mental health. But now I look at therapy in a very different way. First of all, I understand that my mental health is something that I learn to manage better. I will never cure the anxious thoughts that I have, and they will evolve and they will develop over time to be different to how they are right now. And it's also something, therapy that is something that I look at as a preventative measure. I'm being proactive about my mental health and my health in general. I'm going to therapy like I would be taking my car for a service. I'm checking in with myself, I'm checking in with a therapist just to make sure that my mind is in a good place, but also to make sure that if there are any underlying thoughts that have popped up that I've coped with, but I don't feel like I have addressed and understood, going to therapy gives me an opportunity to express those thoughts, understand those thoughts in more detail, and be given the tools to manage those thoughts better. So that if they do pop up in the future, I'm then able to manage those thoughts better because I've already put the work in earlier in the year or at an earlier point in my life to address that thought or that emotion when it comes up. So that's an analogy for you to perhaps ponder on, is are you viewing your health the same way and prioritizing your health the same way that you prioritize your possessions? If you haven't had therapy before, you might, like I did, look at it as a cure for your mental health. And like I said a minute ago, that's how I viewed therapy when I first started having therapy and when I first had counselling. But what I've come to realise now is that I find the most benefit from therapy when I use it as a preventative measure, and I use it as something to proactively learn about my mental health and try and understand the way that my mind works a lot better. And in this episode, I want to kind of share 3 key lessons that I've taken from individual moments in therapy. Not from globally, like I've just been sharing, but from individual moments. So I'm going to move on to talk about that now. And the first big lesson I learned from therapy was when I was at university and I was having counselling, or I had a counselling session because I wasn't looking after myself in the right way. I mentioned in the first episode on mental health and me what that was. So again, if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to that episode to understand why I went to therapy while I was at university. One of the things that came out of counselling while I was at uni was the counsellor reminded me of the things that I enjoy doing, because at the time I'd lost sight of that. I'd lost sight of the things that I enjoy. And I think we can sometimes get lost and forget the things that we enjoy doing because we get wrapped up in life. We go to work and we might have a busy period at work where we go to work, we come home from work, we're so tired from work that we don't do the things that we enjoy, and we do the necessary things like eating, looking after our hygiene, and then go to bed. Or maybe you've got dependents and you care for your dependents, and then you have a period of time where you can sleep, and then you wake up and you repeat the cycle. And if it's just 1 or 2 days, it might not be too much of an issue. And it's very easy for me to say from my perspective because I don't have any dependents. But one thing that the counsellor at uni reminded me of was that I have to find time and make time, not just find it, but actively make the time to do the things that I enjoy. Because when I don't do those, or not even things that I enjoy necessarily, but do things that support me and support my mental health. And a few of the things that I wasn't doing at the time is I wasn't getting any fresh air, I wasn't exercising, I wasn't sleeping very well, and that was just a few of the things that I was experiencing. I wasn't socialising very much either, I wasn't talking to people. So that counsellor at uni reminded me of the importance of doing things that support my mental health. And that could simply be doing a bit of light exercise. So one of the things that we discussed was the trouble that I was having with my sleep and the I'm going to term it insomnia that I was experiencing. And one of the reasons that we established why I was not sleeping very well was because I wasn't moving my body. And at that period of time, I can't quite remember fully, but I think I might have had an injury or something, or just generally I wasn't moving my body because I didn't feel like I wanted to, and I didn't want to leave the house, as I mentioned in that episode. So instead, she suggested some of the small things that I could do to support my mental health by moving. So we created this little stretching routine that I did in the evening so that I was moving my body And so that it was preparing my mind for sleep, because again, at the time I was spending all of my time in my bedroom. I was studying in my bedroom, I was eating in my bedroom, I was, sleeping obviously, and just not leaving my room. So it wasn't a safe space to sleep. I wasn't creating an environment that was conducive to sleep. So she suggested how I could create that environment that was conducive for sleep. And one of the things was moving my body, so doing a little stretching routine before I went to bed. And she also asked me when I have felt most happy and most free. And at the time, I felt most happy and most free when I went camping in my summer holidays. Now, obviously I couldn't sleep outside. I was in the middle, or not the middle, I was in the outskirts of Leeds city centre. But it was a very built up area, so I couldn't sleep outside. We didn't have a garden. And even if we did, I wouldn't have wanted to anyway. But she suggested a candle form, getting a candle that would remind me of the sense of being outside, the smells that I would have when I was outside. And I often feel at most at peace sitting around a fire or looking at a fire in a fireplace or a wood burner, depending on how you term it. So she suggested getting a candle so that I could bring those smells, those relaxing smells, into the room, but also because the flame would replicate something that I found quite relaxing. And both of those things reminded me of finding the time and making the time to do things that supported my mental health, and that reminded me of what peace felt like and what peace looked like. So that was one of the key early lessons I found through counselling and through therapy, was just identifying the things that, in short, it was identifying the things that gave me peace, that cleared my mind and made me feel relaxed, I think is a good way to summarise that. So that was lesson number one. And that was very early in my journey. Again, as cliche as that sounds, my journey with understanding my mental health better. Lesson number two was learned quite a few years later. And lesson number two was born from the fact that I often, because of some of the things I spoke about in part one, I often put other people's opinion and also other people in general above myself. I want to help other people, and I will often prioritise helping other people before I prioritise helping myself. And this therapist, because I was having CBT at the time, this therapist said, he actually said, I am the most important person to myself. Now, he had a wife, he had children, and he said, I am the most important person to myself. And he explained his interpretation of that, and I explained how I interpreted the message that he was saying as well. And the way that I interpreted that message, and again, you might not agree with this, you might agree with this, but my perception of that message was, in order to help other people, I have to help myself first. If my health is not in a good place, if I'm not doing things and I'm not finding time to support my own health and my own mind and my own body and my own social well-being and my own well-being as a whole, I'm not giving 100% to the people that I want to help. Because I'm not able to, because my health might not be in the best place or my well-being might not be in the best place. So in order to fulfill the value or fulfill the thing that I want to do, which is to help people, I have to find time to help myself first. Because if I'm not helping myself, then it means that I can't help other people in the best way possible. And I'm often somebody that wants to present the best version of myself as often as I can. And I Sometimes that might be simply getting up out of bed in the morning and going to work. Other times that is this very outgoing, this very supportive, this very motivational individual that supports people in their lowest moments. But I want to give the best of myself all of the time. And in order to give the best of myself, I have to make sure that I'm in the best place possible. And I know that I won't always be in the best place possible, but I can make sure that I am supporting myself regardless of what place I am in. And sometimes that means saying no as well. Sometimes that means saying no to social events. Sometimes that means saying no if work have asked me to stay late or go and do an extra training session somewhere. But sometimes it's also saying yes when my mind is telling me to say no. So if I am feeling like I'm isolating myself and somebody invites me to socialize with them, instead of saying no, which is what my body or my mind might think it wants because I feel like I want to be alone, actually sometimes it's saying yes. And prioritizing myself is going out and socializing with that person and having some social interaction and spending some time with my friends. But in short, the lesson I took away from that is that in order to be the best version of myself, or in order to help other people, I have to help myself first. And I've had discussions with my mates about this, and some of them have different opinions to me. But that is a lesson that I have taken away. Maybe it is a lesson that I will carry through with me. Maybe it's not. But at this moment in time, I think that is very apt for where I am in my life. And finally, lesson number 3. And lesson number 3 was something that I learned very recently. And this lesson, in hindsight, makes so much sense. And at the time, it was very much a light bulb moment for me. And this lesson was learning about what core beliefs are. So I spoke in part 1 about my insecurities when I was a teenager and in my young adult life. And even insecurities that I'm carrying through with me at this moment in time that I'm still learning to, not to overcome, I'm learning to manage, and I'm learning to hear those insecurities, but know that they are not what define me. And through speaking to this therapist, again, I was having cognitive behavioural therapy at the time. Through speaking to this therapist, she explained to me that a fear that I had wasn't a fear at all. It was in fact a core belief. So to give you an understanding of how this conversation went, in the session before the session I had where I understood about core beliefs, my therapist asked me to go away and do an activity that highlighted some of the challenges that I'd experienced with my mental health as I was growing up. And it was diving into those experiences, trying to relive those experiences and understand how I felt during those experiences, how other people made me feel during those experiences, but also the physical sensations that developed during those experiences. So I was really trying to embody and live those experiences as fully as I could when I was doing this activity, which I did independently, when I was doing this activity around reliving those experiences. And then during the therapy session that followed that, she asked me what my biggest fear was. And one of my biggest fears is that I won't be good enough. And it's born from those insecurities, that comparison that I draw between me and other people. And it's not being good enough in all aspects of life. Not being good enough at work, not being good enough from a physical standpoint, not being good enough with my health, not being good enough in a relationship. And all of the things that are involved in being in a relationship. You know, not being good enough at intimacy, perhaps, or not being good enough at supporting my partner, or not being good enough for my partner's parents, whatever that could be. Not being good enough for my own parents and my own family and my own friends. But essentially it was this fear, this blanket fear of not being good enough. And she then explained to me that this fear that I've been experiencing isn't a fear at all. It's in fact a core belief that I hold about myself. From the experiences that I've had as I've grown up, from the experiences that I outlined, because I typed up these experiences into a document and I emailed it over to my therapist as part of the activity. From the experiences that I outlined with my therapist, she highlighted to me that it's not a fear that I'm not good enough. It's a core belief that I hold about myself. My core belief is that I don't think I'm good enough. And that was a light bulb moment for me, because I always felt like it was a fear. And it was a fear that I would never overcome, no matter what I did. But as soon as she explained to me that it was a core belief that I hold about myself, it made me realise that I can change how I perceive myself and the belief that I hold of myself as well. Because ultimately it's the way that I'm thinking. I think I'm not good enough. But because it is a thought, I can change the way that I'm thinking. And I'm in the process of changing that. I'm in the process of trying not to be a perfectionist, because part of this fear of not being good enough means that I act like, or not act, I think I have to be perfect at everything. And I'm learning to overcome that. I'm learning to change the way that I think, to remind myself that it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks of me. What matters is what I think of myself. And as long as I think I'm doing the right things, and as long as I think I'm carrying myself in the way that I should, I have a responsibility to carry myself in a proper way. Like, I don't want to be arrogant. I don't want to be clueless and unempathetic towards people. Empathy is a huge part of the way that I've been brought up, but it's a huge part of my personality as well. And as I've mentioned in the second episode, authenticity and relatability are a huge value for this podcast, but they're also values I carry of myself as well. So I do care about what people think of me, but it doesn't define who I am. What defines who I am is what I think of myself. And the thing that I'm trying to remind myself of at the moment is that I am enough. No matter what job I have, no matter what body shape I have, no matter what failures I have, no matter if I don't get things perfect, I am enough. And I always will be enough for myself. And hopefully I'll meet somebody who realises that in me as well. But I'm not defining my worth based on how other people perceive me and what other people think of me. And it's actually something that I've written on my mirror in my bedroom. So for those of you watching on video, you might be able to see in the corner there's a mirror, and at the bottom of that mirror there's a whiteboard, and on the bottom of that whiteboard I've put a reminder, and it's a reminder to myself, but the way that I've phrased it is also a reminder to my younger self as well, and also to my future self. And it simply says, remember, we are always enough. The younger version of myself is enough. The current version of myself is enough, and the future version of myself is enough. But I have to, at this moment in time, keep reminding myself of that. Because I'm still learning and I'm still trying to adapt the thoughts that have been ingrained in me for 27 years. For the majority of those 27 years, my fear and my core belief has been that I am not good enough. So it's not going to change overnight. I have to work and I have to be proactive and put the time and put the effort in to change that core belief that I have of myself. And in the future, I might get to a point where I have changed it, but it doesn't mean that it won't come back either. So it's also a case of me building coping strategies, which again, I'm learning to do. Building coping strategies in so that I do remind myself that I am enough. And if I feel like I'm not enough, then I know how I can remind myself again and how I can get back to that feeling of being enough. So that was lesson number 3. And this brings me to the last thing I want to talk about in this episode. All of these lessons and all of these experiences and understandings I've developed from having therapy have been, quite frankly, life-changing for me. And I've spoken to people in the past that don't think they need therapy, or perhaps don't want therapy because of the perception that it brings, or perhaps the perception they have of what therapy is. My opinion and my opinion of therapy is that everyone can benefit from therapy. But one thing you have to accept, and it took me a number of times going through therapy to realise this. I learned to accept that therapy is meant to challenge me, and it is meant to make me feel uncomfortable. And I think if you are considering having therapy, or maybe you haven't considered having therapy yet because you don't think it's for you, that's okay. But I would say that if you are going to have therapy in the future, maybe you're scared of having therapy because you don't want to be made uncomfortable. Therapy will make you feel uncomfortable, and it will challenge you. But from that discomfort, from that challenge, is potentially a better version of you, and is a version that you can become even more proud of than the version of you that you are right now. And I've had friends that haven't wanted therapy but have gone off to therapy, and then we've had conversations, or they've gone off to counselling or gone off to therapy, and we've had conversations about their experiences and some of the things that they have learned during therapy. And I've shared some of the things that I've learned during therapy. And I've also had conversations with friends that don't feel like therapy is right for them. They feel scared of going to therapy perhaps, or they don't like the idea of going to therapy. And that's okay. Like, I'm not going to force them to go to therapy because ultimately it's their decision. And one thing that I do say to them, and I remind myself of, is going to therapy is uncomfortable. It does challenge you. But I think it is one of the most valuable things you can not only invest your time in, but you can invest your finances into as well. I also appreciate that therapy isn't accessible for everyone. If you go through the NHS, then it is free. But the waiting lists on the NHS are incredibly long, so it might not be accessible for everyone. There are a lot of resources out there that can help you get a therapy-like experience, but do it yourself. And yes, there is no greater benefit than talking to other people, but there are lots of self-help resources out there that are for free or that are for a smaller fee than what therapy costs, to learn about your mental health a lot more, to understand your mental health, but also understand more about you. I think this is another thing, that a misconception of what therapy is. Therapy isn't just about your mental health. Therapy is about understanding who you are and understanding more about the way that your mind works. So if you are considering therapy and you haven't taken that step yet, I would highly encourage you to do that. Not just because I know the benefit in it, but also because on the other side, I can guarantee you will be a different person. And I can also guarantee you'll be a better person for it as well. That is where I'm going to end part 2 of the Mental Health and Me series. In part 3, I'm going to be touching even more upon discomfort and how experiencing uncomfortable things is a good thing. Until then, have a fantastic week. Thank you for listening. And as always, my name is Tom Regan, and this is the Training Tom podcast.